You wrote a trade deadline piece, and I liked it. You know, the bubble teams and what might happen, teams are trying to figure out which way they want to go. But I'm going to ask you about the Cubs because the Cardinals travel up to Wrigley Field for 4 games this weekend, and then not so long after that, I think it'll be 4 in St. Louis the following weekend. So we obviously have a very keen interest in the Cubs. What do you think they're going to do? You think they've determined their course that they're going to take yet?
I mean, yes, I'll leave a caveat out there because until the deadline, they play below 500 teams, mostly the Cardinals, 8 times. And so I suppose if somehow they got back to 500 and drew within 4 games of first place, they might consider standing pat. I think they're one of these teams that after selling off 2 years in a row, they would love to stand pat, right? They would love to even add on the edges, but they have to give Jed Hoyer a reason to, and they haven't to this point, and time is running out. So I think they've made their decision, but you always leave a caveat, especially in this division, if you can somehow go on a run, and think about it, if you go on a run with 2 weeks to go, as the deadline approaches, everyone's mindset will have changed, right? Oh, my God, this team is playing good baseball. How can we sell off? So we're approaching the point of no return, but I'll give them and that's why they were included in the bubble team even over the Cardinals, just because they're a few games ahead of St. Louis, a few games close to first place. They're the only team with a positive run differential in the NL Central. So there's a slight caveat, but for all intent and purposes, Bernie, they're going to move on probably from Bellinger and probably from Stroman and maybe a couple others.
I think it makes sense. I do, because you can see that they've got the pieces coming together. I mean, their starting pitching's been terrific this year. And tell us, Jesse, what do you think they need? Maybe, in the short term, but even looking, I know this is kind of a bad question because who knows what's going to happen at the trade deadline, but as they're setting up for next year, what do you think some of the areas they'd like to address to get stronger?
No, there's a big picture here that is really interesting, Bernie, because they do have some nice pieces. You mentioned it. They're building something. But you know what they need, Bernie? They need 2 players to finish first and second or first and third in MVP voting. Sound familiar? What they lack is true star potential, which I guess Cody Bellinger, and I do think he's probably returned to form, would be that guy, but I think Scott Boras is going to take him to free agency. So as, Ian Happ's a nice player. The guy in right, Seiya Suzuki's a nice player. Swanson's a really good player. Nico Horner's a good player. They don't have MVP caliber Bryce Harper, Arenado, Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani in the pipeline. That's what they need. You can win with 1 through 8 being really good. The Giants are trying to do that out west. But most of the time, you need a star or 2 in the middle of that lineup because of the impact they can have. And they lack that, and it's hard to see one on the horizon.
Jesse Rogers with us, our friend, Chicago-based ESPN national baseball writer, and always a pleasure to talk with him. Please follow him on Twitter at Jesse Rogers ESPN, and Jesse is JESSE, at Jesse Rogers ESPN. Jesse, it's difficult to ascertain what the market might be, but I'm going to ask you if you just have some general thoughts about it. Jordan Montgomery has been made available. Jack Flaherty's been made available. I think Jordan Hicks is probably available for the right price. They have another reliever, the Cardinals do, Chris Stratton, who's kind of underrated because he's adorable. He can pitch every day, it seems. What do you think? They're all walk-year guys, which complicates it. What kind of market do you think there'll be, especially for those starting pitchers and Jordan Hicks? But you got any thoughts on that, my friend?
Yeah, I would add Paul DeJong to that list. I think the Cardinals are going to move, 3 to 4 guys. Actually, I think it actually uncomplicates it a little bit when you're a pending free agent. When you have multiple years left, like Soto did, it becomes a much more complicated deal because the value is hard to judge. 2 months is easy to judge. It's 2 months. And there's a history of rentals every year that teams can play off of. Now, Jordan Montgomery being hot and being left-handed ups the ante a little bit. Like the Cubs have Marcus Stroman. I think Montgomery's probably worth a little bit more because he's left-handed. And like Lucas Giolito on the other side of town in Chicago. they're all in a similar spot, right? They're all in a similar spot. They're all good. They're not necessarily all number ones, right? They're maybe 1As or 2s. So think about, a 2-month rental for a really good pitcher. You get a couple good prospects, maybe one in the top 5 or 2 in the top 10 or one at 6 and one at 10. You don't get another team's number 1 prospect, but you might get a number 4 to number 8, something like that. You might get maybe you get just a number 2, a second best prospect on a franchise. So that's kind of how you look at the 2-month rentals. Now, if it was a true ace like Ohtani, although he's a unicorn, you'd get more. At ESPN.com today, we proposed trades for Ohtani, and they were minimum 4 players, 5 players, 6 players. For Jordan Montgomery, it's a couple players, like most rentals are, maybe 3 if it's a 7, a 10, and a 15. You know what I mean? In terms of prospect rankings on another team. So it's really not that hard to figure out. It's just you got to hit a home run. The last year, Tyler Mahle of the Reds was traded to the Twins, okay? Now, he wasn't a rental, but still, they got 3 prospects back. One of them is Spencer Steer. Spencer Steer is helping the Cincinnati Reds contend this year. And Tyler Mahle is nothing special, right? So you take a flyer. It's all a roll of the dice. You get a couple prospects back, and you hope to turn into something special in a year or 2.
Jesse Rogers with us from ESPN.com, MLB writer. Jesse, from your perspective, the teams that are in the hunt, or they believe they're in the hunt, though maybe a couple of them, like you said, bubble teams, maybe that could change in the next 2 weeks. But who is, in your view, who's really desperate or just really really hungry, I guess, to add starting pitching?
I don't think it's a big mystery. I think it's basically all the contenders, to be honest. I think Atlanta would love to do it as good as they are. Certainly Tampa Bay, they've had all sorts of injuries. I mean, Baltimore could probably use a veteran presence that's sort of been there, done that before. Houston's had injuries. I mean, I'm really reeling off every team. You would think Texas would need one to replace DeGrom, but they've been pretty darn good without him. So maybe not Texas. I suppose the Marlins are a team that doesn't need starting pitching. Maybe Milwaukee if they get Woodruff back. Cincinnati certainly will. So let's go through that again. The Reds need to add. Atlanta could add. Houston could add. Tampa Bay and Baltimore could all add. Heck, Toronto could add the way Alek Manoah is going. There's 5, 6, 7 contenders that certainly could add starting pitching.
Do you see an aggressive market for bullpen help? Because that seems to be, over the last few years maybe that's one thing about this, the way the trade deadline is now compared to how it was a long time ago. Relievers seem to be in greater demand than ever. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, there's a couple, like you said, there's no waiver wire thing in August anymore. So you really have to stockpile in case of injuries. And the other thing is they're as volatile as ever. So teams that are selling these relievers figure even if they're having a good year, they may not have a good year next year. So let's just move on and get something for them. And we'll develop another reliever or find someone, some diamond in the rough next year. That's the thing to go first, to be honest. This, on a losing team, if you have a decent closer, you get rid of him. You get something for him because he is useless for the final 2 months of the season. And that goes for 8th inning and 7th inning guys as well. So, yeah, we will see the reliever market move as usual, and especially so without the waiver wire in August.
Jesse, how do you handicap? And again, man, this trading deadline obviously could change things, but as these teams are presently composed, who do you like to win the NL Central?
Oh, the NL Central. I thought you were going to say the National League because that's easy. Atlanta is far and away the best
right.
team. You talk to executives on other teams, and they, executives grudgingly give credit to other teams, right? They all point to Atlanta as far and away the best team. Look, FanGraphs, all these prediction places, they all say Milwaukee's clear-cut favorite and has been for months. Even when the Reds took over, Milwaukee was like a 60% favorite to win the division. Maybe they've proven why even over the last couple weeks. They have the pitching to do it. Think about it. I think you'd agree. Milwaukee has the best overall pitching staff, and they have the best manager.
Yes.
That's it. that usually is enough to win a weak division like the AL and NL Central. So I'm not going to go against Milwaukee. Cincinnati doesn't have the experience. They don't have the pitching. The Cubs and Cardinals have underachieved, and the bottom's has fallen out for the Pirates. Milwaukee might win this thing by 5-6 games, like St. Louis or Cleveland last year kind of ran away with it late. I think Milwaukee is good. I don't think they're great, but they're certainly good enough to win this division.
Yeah, their run prevention is really good. It's all relative, but you're right. And I just look at their starting pitching, as you noted. You consider all the turmoil they've had, guys on the IL, they come back, like Wade Miley. He's back on the IL again. He doesn't think he'll be there long. But they've had to shuffle in a lot of starting pitchers, but they've made some smart pickups, and they're very resourceful. And I admire the heck out of the Brewers. I really do. They managed to outmaneuver the Cardinals, who spent a lot more money. And I think for the most part, everybody screws up from time to time. And the Hader trade was, certainly a disruption. But Milwaukee always seems to be able to maximize what they have, given the payroll they have. And Matt Arnold was really terrific. If he can do something to pepper up that offense a little bit,
right?
I don't think there's any doubt they'll win the division and maybe even be a hassle in the National League playoffs.
Well, what's interesting, Bernie, is Craig Counsell is a free agent at the end of this year. I do not believe he is signed up after this year. Can you imagine him on the open market, what he's done with a mid-level payroll in a tougher division with St. Louis and Chicago, have more money to spend? I think Counsell is as good as anybody in the game, and I think all these underachieving teams would love to have a guy like that. I mean, I don't know what he's making up in Milwaukee, but it can't be as much as Steve Cohn would pay him or someone else like that. So I feel like he's like, to me, he's like a $10 million player, because he adds to your team that other teams just don't have. I think Craig Counsell is that good, and the run they've been on is a combination of him and the front office being on the same page.
Jesse Rogers, you're the best, man. Thank you for your generosity coming on with us. I love when we always get the chance to talk. So we'll be reading you. We'll be following you on Twitter. And I know it's work, but have fun. And you've always impressed me as a guy that's, even though it's work, you always have fun. So
Definitely.
You love covering ball.
This is a fun time of year. Unfortunately, 8 games with 2 sellers coming up. It's weird to see the Cubs and Cardinals both. I mean, certainly St. Louis never does. And if Arenado or Goldschmidt get on the market, let me know, because I'll be down there next weekend, because then it becomes a bigger sell-off. That's something the Cardinals never do. But it's going to be an interesting 2 weeks for both teams in both cities. Yeah,
and it's a huge chance. Before we say goodbye, and I'm sorry to extend it a little bit, but
that's okay.
I think, Jesse, because you have such great knowledge of the Cardinals, but also the landscape here. I believe, John Mozeliak's not in good stead right now with the fans. I mean, there have been some really bad trades, and they've been really passive, or at least not as aggressive as they should be. They've ignored their starting pitching problems. I mean, Mo, and he's had a great run, don't get me wrong, but they've sort of lapsed into some bad habits, if that's the way to put it. He's never had the chance to be a seller, never. The Cardinals haven't made a seller-type trade since sending Willie McGee to Oakland in 1990. This is a huge credibility check for Mozeliak, because this sounds really dramatic, so pardon me, but the immediate future of the franchise in terms of the Cardinals' tradition of winning is very much on the line, because they have to do something with their pitching, because they used to be, as you know, the model for run prevention, and pardon my language, they've let that go to hell. Mozeliak is really under the pressure. He really is.
Yeah,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It feels like they've, from a distance, almost taken it for granted. Oh, we'll be able to pitch. We'll figure it out. We turned John Lester and J.A. Happ into productive people a couple years ago. We got Montgomery. He helped us last year. But it just feels like they ignored it is probably too strong, but it's like you have to pay attention, right? You have to pay attention to your kids. You got to pay attention to your pitching. Not that they completely didn't, but you get my point. It's almost like it was taken for granted, and all of a sudden the Roosters have come home, right? It's just something's missing. Relying on Wainwright at 40 years old, letting him go play at the WBC, just like, okay, we'll be all right. Well, one day you woke up and it wasn't so right,
Right.
So that's kind of how I feel.
Jesse, you're the best, man. Love having you on. And until next time, be well, my friend.
Absolutely, Bernie. Anytime. Take care.
All right. That's our guy, Jesse Rogers, ESPN.com. And I think Jim Hewer, I mean this. Listen, I'm complimentary of all our guests. That's why they're guests. I like them.
Right.
And I respect them, right? Other than people actually working in St. Louis who cover the team, there isn't anybody that I trust more or value more in terms of the view of the Cardinals than Jesse Rogers, because he's a Chicago guy. He was a Cubs beat writer before he went national. I mean, he's covered not just the Cubs, but he's covered the Cardinals a lot through the years. And he just has a really outstanding working knowledge of the St. Louis Cardinals terrain. Like he's not just kind of guessing at things. He's got the knowledge, and he has the perspective. So I always like talking to him because I know it's going to be an informed take, and we agree just about all the times. Sometimes we don't, but anyway, it was really good to have him on. Really good to have him on. So
I liked his assessment there when he was talking about last year. We'll just go get a couple guys and fix it. And that has been their attitude. Unfortunately, it's too late for that now. And
right.
The other thing was, and we kind of touched on this a little bit, well, there's always a guy or two that will be the middle reliever to fill the hole.
Yeah.
They don't have it this year. And they didn't have it down below.
They don't. There's none of those backfill guys. But, see, that's why I like Jesse so much, because he gets it. You don't have to tell him sort of what's going on behind the scenes here. He already knows about it, where they got complacent. They let things slide. We're the Cardinals. We'll be fine. That kind of attitude. Yep. It finally caught up with him. And one more thing before we take a break. I'll say this, and I'm giving myself a pat on the back, so forgive me, or you can get mad at me, whatever. But I've been saying since last year that the NL Central, for the Cardinals, the NL Central is their best friend and their worst enemy. And people say, well, what do you mean worst enemy? It's easy for them to win. Yeah, it has been easy for them to win. And that actually softens them up because they don't feel like they have to do bump. They don't feel like they have to make their team better. Well, we'll be fine. Central, we'll be fine. So it's a wonderful thing because, again, they've had traditionally an easier path in the Central, but it's also made them soft. It's also made them complacent. It's made them arrogant. And now it finally blew up on them. And I figured that I didn't expect anything this bad, right? Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But it came back to bite them. It did. This NL Central paradox is a good way to put it. Hey, before we take a break here at Friendly's, Cardinals up 6-3, top of the ninth. So Stratton is pitching, I do believe.
Yep.
And we'll recap the Cardinals game as soon as it's over, and I have a chance to regroup and get. I know Nolan Gorman probably star of the game though, 3-run homer, then another RBI later.
Yep,
Nolan Gorman's looking good again. That's exciting.
Yes. That's
exciting. They need that. And by the way, Cardinals baseball is a lot more fun when he's hitting them 450 feet. When he's hitting rockets, it's a much more entertaining team.